Hey, everybody, it's Natalie Bencivenga, and welcome to another edition of Facts Over Fear. Congressman Chris Deluzio is joining me today, and he knows what it means to serve his country, not just as a representative in Washington, but on the ground in uniform. And as questions grow about United States' military involvement abroad, in particular with the current war in Iran, people want to know, why are the guardrails around war slipping? Why are presidents so quick to go to war without congressional approval? And why isn't Congress stepping in? That question keeps coming up in my feed and from my audience. So I wanted to make sure we bring that into the conversation today. So we're going to talk a little bit about presidential war powers, what it would actually take to stop a military operation, and how decisions made overseas are impacting people right here in Pennsylvania. Representative Deluzio, thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, Natalie, thanks for having me on. Lots to dig into.
And we're going to make it happen. So first, I just wanted to get your thoughts as a veteran. Do you believe that the United States has become over the years just too quick to deploy troops? And is the threshold for putting boots on the ground lower than it should be?
Yeah, I think the country has been, frankly, reckless at times in sending Americans to fight and bleed and die. And it's aren't just academic or hypothetical things to talk about. There are already 13 Americans dead from this war in Iran, many more wounded, lots of Iranians suffering in this as well. And so I think over time, we've seen presidents in both parties, to be really blunt, take war powers that belong to the American people into the Congress. I've long talked about my standard. Can I look my constituents in the eye and say, hey, you should fight, or your kids or your grandkids? And if the answer to that is no, it's not something that I'd be willing to say you should risk your life for, or your son or your daughter or your grandkids, the country probably shouldn't be going to do that fighting. And I think the Congress here hasn't even asked that question. I think the answer to that question they did would be no. But as you know, and you pointed out, the president has started this war and is prosecuting this war without so much as the Congress voting to declare war or authorize military force.
No, and I appreciate that, because I wanted to expand that beyond just the Trump administration that's been culpable in just kind of taking us into into war in multiple stages and phases of this country. So when we're looking at that, though, Representative Deluzio, are we effectively saying that by bypassing Congress when it comes to war powers, that has really shifted constitutional balance too far towards the executive branch?
I think so. And I voted, in my first term when Joe Biden was president for two different war powers resolutions for the basic reason that the Congress needs to take back these powers from the executive branch. And that's what our Constitution requires. All of the questions you are seeing being asked and the shifting explanations from this administration and this war are the exact kinds of hard questions that guys like me, I serve on the Armed Services Committee, would be asking before we would ever send Americans to fight, which I think highlights the exact problem of a president on their own making this decision without so much as asking the American people what they think.
And I want to dig into that quickly here. A lot of people were blowing up my DMs today in anticipation for this conversation. Why isn't Congress doing anything? I mean, that's the frustration that I'm hearing. And I keep telling them, look, I'll just go to the source. So can you explain what is happening? Is anything happening?
It's unbelievably frustrating. We had a vote in both the House and the Senate a couple of weeks back on a war powers resolution, which would have said essentially put a stop to this war. You want to come back and make the case? Fine, come talk to the Congress. And that vote failed, both House and Senate. I think that was really weak to see nearly all of the Republicans in the House vote against it. I think maybe two only voted for it. And a couple Democrats crossed over with the other Republicans. I think it was weak. The other way that the Congress can assert itself here is on the funding side. There's talk now that the administration may come back to us and ask for $200 billion
with a B.
This war, with a B. By the way, I started to look with my team. $200 billion could essentially fund childcare for every kid under 5 in this country.
Wow.
So when we say there are choices and values at play, this administration seems to have no problem starting a war that the Congress, the American people haven't authorized, and finding billions for that, and yet they're taking healthcare away from people. And so the Congress, on both the funding side and the war powers resolution votes more directly, could really assert itself here.
Yeah.
They haven't. Guys like me are trying to, but we need more. We need a different majority, or we need people to change their mind. And I'm banking on a different majority come November.
I'm banking on that as well. I know we only have a few minutes left, so I wanted to make sure I get to an important question because um, when we're looking at this and we're talking about the cost of living, in particular the impact of that it's impacting Pennsylvanians, because I always say Pennsylvania is like a petri dish. If it's happening here, it's happening everywhere. Mixing that with our dependence on oil, what are your thoughts as it pertains to all of these issues? Because people are frustrated at the when they're going to fill up their tank, they're frustrated
Yeah.
at the grocery store. You've commented on our dependence on foreign oil. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Look, let's start with the oil in the Middle East, right? These
Yeah.
are Middle Eastern despots selling their oil principally. China is the largest buyer. So
Hmm.
the American people, we're something like single digit low percent of oil that's even coming in from the Middle East. So this is not directly us, but we are much more or much too much exposed to global oil prices. You see, if you're
Hmm.
filling up your gas tank, it's going north of 375
Right.
a gallon around home. And I've made the point that the thing you ought to be doing in our
Hmm.
country to make us less exposed to oil shocks is have new clean energy sources of power coming on. And this
That's true.
administration killed a lot of those projects, solar and wind, and I could go on and on, hydro, you name it. That makes us less exposed when there are shocks and disruptions to oil markets like in the Middle East. And this administration did the opposite before they started a war that has now further disrupted global oil markets and led to prices going up for all of us. These things are linked. And I
Hmm.
think it is foolish for them to have done the first thing, right? Kill these clean energy projects that could have better protected us, even if they didn't start this war, from
Mm.
what happens in places like the Middle East, which, as you know, are volatile. I'd rather us be less exposed to the American people when something's going on in this region and where there are petrodollars and dictators, frankly, who have very different incentives than thinking about the American people.
How serious is the midterms in November? Because if we recognize all of these issues that you've just laid out, and if we
Mhm.
understand the reality that President Trump could end up in a position where he can't really get away with the things that he's getting away with and his administration is getting away with, how important are the midterms? And are you concerned about voter suppression or any kind of tampering?
I think the midterms could be huge. We have
Hmm.
now lived under nearly 2 years of full Republican control under the Trump
Hmm.
administration. It's been a failure, right? We're seeing a war that we didn't need to fight. We're seeing this cost of living emergency getting worse. I think folks want some checks. They want divided government in this moment to put those guardrails around the worst abuses. And I haven't even talked about the abuses on the immigration enforcement side.
Mm.
The list is long. And so I think divided government is a real opportunity to put a stop to some of the worst, to have more power when we have these appropriations and spending fights, where you
Hmm.
really can have something to say about which government agencies and what they are doing and how they're funded, and oversight where there have been abuses or violations of the law. And I've seen the Congress, where I'm in the minority now, not be willing to hold accountable officials in this administration. So I think all of it comes back to the stakes in November.
Yeah.
And look, I don't want to diminish or minimize the kinds of threats or fears you've talked about. We know what happened after the 2020 presidential election at the Capitol.
Yeah.
And yet I have great, great confidence in the local election officials at the county, across the Commonwealth, who really run our elections.
Hmm.
These are civil servants. These are people doing their jobs. And we'll be prepared for anything, but I have great confidence in those folks.
Well, I appreciate your optimism and I appreciate your time. I know you're on a tight timeline today, so I'm going to
Yeah.
let you go. But thank you, as always, for joining me for important conversations. I look forward to more. And if you just joined us, I know a lot of people did. Don't worry, this is going to be available to play back soon after we're done here. So thank you so much, Representative Chris Deluzio. Appreciate you. And until next time, everyone, take care of yourselves and each other. Thank you.